morning, veteran entrepreneurs. This is the Warrior Rising podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Bunn. Just as a reminder, Warrior Rising is the premier veteran transition organization specializing in helping veterans start their own businesses. Our programs cover everything from business plan development, continued coaching and mentorship through industry experts that are participating or volunteering their time to our programs. And then, of course, we have accelerator programs that we're working in partnership with Grand Valley State University. Individuals that make it through our entire program funnel have the opportunity to submit their business ideas and plans for consideration for some of our national business showers. We have anywhere from 3 to 4 per year. You could be the next individual that has an opportunity to attend a business shower, pitching your ideas to industry experts with the opportunity to win grants in upwards of tens of thousands of dollars. I'm here with you today for episode 1 of Office Hours. Office Hours is an opportunity for me to just kind of address general questions about veteran entrepreneurship. Right now, or for the first initial episodes, we're just going to talk about a couple topics that I think are top of mind or would be an excellent way for us to kind of introduce the concept of office hours to our listener base. Podcast is still very young. So we're still in kind of the beta phase of the podcast, but I'm excited for you guys to be joining us. Moving forward, what we would love to see are great questions from our veteran entrepreneurs that have broad impact to our program participants. So if you're a veteran out there that has a great question for the Warrior Rising podcast that you'd like us to address on office hours, send it to programming@warriorrising.org, and we'd be happy to integrate your question as part of our podcast, right? Make sure you send your name, send us a quick intro about what your business is about, and then tell us what your question is. Like I said, this is episode 1. So for today, I kind of wanted to introduce us to the topic of entrepreneurship and specifically why anybody would want to become an entrepreneur in the first place. So this begs the question, why become an entrepreneur? And I don't want to make it sound like this is an either or scenario. And by either or, I don't want you to think that, hey, you either can become an entrepreneur or you're just working a 9 to 5 at Discount Auto Parts. There's for sure a lot of different career paths, hybrid paths, whether it be consulting, working for a top 20 Fortune 500 company, running a lifestyle business versus an entrepreneurial effort that has vast economy of scale. You know, this is very nuanced, and I don't want anybody to get the impression that I'm just like, hey, either you start your own business or you're working for the man. But I do think it's a really interesting topic to understand why individuals decide to become entrepreneurs in the first place, and then some of the big decisions, some of the big things hanging in the air that help us determine whether or not we want to move forward and become an entrepreneur. And I'd just like to discuss some of those pros and cons today. So why become an entrepreneur, right? I got a whiteboard here. The whiteboard is mostly there as a prop, but it's also going to be there to help me remind myself what I'm talking about and stay on track. And I've created about 5 bulleted points here that I want to talk through this morning. Number 1 is when deciding to become an entrepreneur, I think what is really important to think about and discuss, something that you need to internalize is do you want the job or do you want the title? And I think this really pertains to people that not only are trying to become entrepreneurs, but also have professional careers out there in the private sector, working for large organizations, or another entrepreneur. And what do I mean when I say, do you want the job or do you want the title? I had a great conversation with one of our veteran entrepreneurs, a gentleman named Ryan Johnson. He's currently fundraising for his startup called Bugle Giving, right? Essentially he's created a marketplace or a platform by which to democratize volunteerism, helping both volunteers find ways to give back to their communities locally and to help find broader organizations or pair up broader organizations with nonprofits doing good works out in their communities. He's currently in his seed round, is doing fantastic work. And I often bounce ideas off of him and vice versa, which I think is really important for anybody that's on an entrepreneurial journey, is to find individuals that are like-minded, you can commiserate with, and you can find advice from, and vice versa. And Ryan's been a great asset to me in that way, and is also a program participant in Warrior Rising. He attended our Salt Lake City business shower the year before last. So do you want the job or do you want the title? Ryan and I had an opportunity to discuss this last week when I was on the road coming back from Boca Raton for business. And he essentially said there's two types of entrepreneurs in the world, right? And he's kind of bucketed them into these two categories. And I tend to agree with him. There's people that want the title or want to be viewed as an entrepreneur. And then there are people that actually want to be entrepreneurs. They actually want to disrupt an industry. They want to start something new, and they want to clear cut their own path in the business world to create something that they think is going to add value to the world. So what do I mean when I say somebody just like wants to be viewed as an entrepreneur? Listen, I stumble onto somebody about once a week I try not to ask people what they do because it seems sort of I feel like I'm prying and it seems like I'm getting into their personal shit. But every now and again it comes up. Somebody's like, "Hey, what do you do?" You know what I mean? Usually when somebody asks me what I do, because I hold various positions across multiple organizations, both as stakeholder, holding C-suite positions or director level positions or board positions, or I'm just some weirdo that's like 1099 consulting for people. I just tell them like what the thing that I've been doing the longest, which is I own a gym. I'm just like, hey man, I own a gym. I've owned it for 8 years. It's located in Ybor City. I got a couple subtenants. I just kind of hang out in there in a t-shirt and Lululemon joggers and just like talk about lifting weights and shit. It's the easiest way to have that conversation. But occasionally when I'm having this discussion, people will tell me that they're an entrepreneur. And sometimes I even get people will tell me they're a serial entrepreneur. Listen, if anybody ever tells you that they're an entrepreneur, without telling you categorically what business sector they're working in or what category of business they're working in, it's probably a little bit of a red flag. If they're telling you that they're a serial entrepreneur, that's probably serial bullshit, okay? Listen, when somebody's a serial entrepreneur, they're going to tell you how many exits they've had, how many organizations they've brought to IPO, if they're a sitting board member, or like potentially how many employees they have or something like this. They're like, hey, but nobody is going to just be like, hey, I'm just a serial entrepreneur. I just kind of mope around starting a gazillion different businesses and keeping my fingers crossed that one of them is actually going to reach an economy of scale that gives me the opportunity to just focus on one goddamn thing that I'm great at and then excel in that position, right? So if you're out there telling everybody you're a serial entrepreneur, no big deal. I get it. You know what I'm saying? You're involved in a bunch of shit. But hey, maybe start talking specifically about what category or expertise you have, and then maybe drill down into the one thing that you've been doing very well for a long period of time. Because when you're talking to somebody that knows what time it is, it sounds like a little bit more legitimate. You know what I mean? And like, listen, not to shit on people that are out there telling everybody that they're a serial entrepreneur. But the fact of the matter is like, whenever I hear that, it's like the follow-on questions almost always become extremely convoluted. And it's like a weird conversation. I feel awkward. They feel awkward, and then the next thing you know, like we're connecting on LinkedIn and they're DMing me or cold calling me about some kind of weird SaaS platform they want me to get involved in. So do you want the job or do you want the title? It's easy to call yourself an entrepreneur. Look, I can start drop shipping socks with somebody's dog's face on it through an Amazon storefront and like offer digital marketing to people. And like, I'm like an entrepreneur, right? But I think in reality, what it means to be an entrepreneur is it means you're signing the front of checks as opposed to the back of checks. Entrepreneurs, founders, right? They have to go home to their families and tell them that the business that they've created has suffered a significant loss. The household is going to take a pay cut across the board. And then on top of that, we're going to have to also take out a second mortgage on the house so that we can dump $100,000 to try and make this business work. That's what entrepreneurship is, right? Entrepreneurship means you're working 7 days a week, in most cases 24 hours a day. It means that you are calling the shots and you are responsible for everything that's done or that has failed to have been done, right? It's a ton of responsibility, and I don't want to make it sound like it's a futile effort or something that's so hard and grindy that nobody should attempt it. But I want to be clear that like being an entrepreneur takes a significant amount of responsibility. You have to definitely be risk aggressive, and then once again, you have to be willing to sign the front of checks as opposed to the back of checks. Which means that you're going to take on significant roles of responsibility, both personally and professionally. People's livelihoods will depend on your leadership and your ability to lead that business forward into the future. And that's if you have a business that reaches an economy of scale that requires both large amounts of capital and employees. So I think it's important to make a decision about what you actually want. If you just want the title of entrepreneur, look, there's 101 different ways to do that. You can start a side hustle, making t-shirts, once again, digital marketing, low-hanging fruit, set yourself up with an Amazon storefront. You'll have the ability to kind of off on the side, just run around and tell people that you're an entrepreneur. But if you truly, truly want to be an entrepreneur, in most cases, that means you're talking about becoming a founder. It means that you have found a pain point for consumers, and you have figured out a way to solve that pain point, right? And most often, or in most cases, when you find a way to solve a problem that exists in the economy, in the market, it's extremely disruptive. You'll come up against a lot of hardship in trying to bring that idea or that business to the market in such a way that it becomes essentially cash flow positive or lucrative. And it's usually a pretty difficult endeavor, right? It's usually a pretty difficult endeavor. Good examples of this are anything that, disrupts like the utility industry. And I think right now, some of the things we're seeing that are pretty violent or alternative uses of power, things like solar, battery or lithium powered electric cars, this kind of stuff, extremely disruptive to the market as we know it, but could potentially have significant upside depending on what your ability is to reach an economy of scale, whether it's through industry manufacturing, blockchain logistics, or just having a really good goddamn idea. So I think first and foremost, you got to make a decision about what it is. Do you want to be an entrepreneur, or do you just want to be viewed as an entrepreneur, right? And I think that'll determine largely how much you're willing to sacrifice and how much you're gonna be willing to put into an effort like this, right? So that's point number one is make a decision about what you actually want to be. Do you want to be viewed as an entrepreneur, or do you want to actually be an entrepreneur? Bullet number two, right? Find your passion and monetize it. I think the reason that a ton of people start entrepreneurial efforts is they have something that they're really, really passionate about, something that they love to do. And then they're like, dang, I'm spending so much time on this hobby that I think it's time for me to monetize it. I am a perfect example of that. I spent many years doing CrossFit. I found it in 2005. I was never a very fit individual. And I found CrossFit as a means to help me kind of reach increased levels of fitness that at the time were required of me professionally. I got my first CrossFit Level 1 certification in 2008, and I started coaching groups and individuals from that time moving forward and haven't stopped since then, to include taking some time to train a young man yesterday afternoon. So I was clearly passionate about health and wellness and loved CrossFit. And so when I retired from the military in 2016, I decided that I was going to start a CrossFit gym. I will tell you, looking back on things, gyms and restaurants have really difficult margins and are probably some of the hardest businesses, not only to open, but to keep open, right? I'm lucky enough that I've owned and run my gym for 8 years. I had a business partner for the first 2 years, bought him out in 2018, and have been running it solo in the same facility since that time. I have about 3 subtenants, and between all organizations that reside underneath the roof have about 30 or 40 employees. So I manage quite a bit in that business. And it's something that I loved. I was in love with CrossFit. I still love it. I still do it several times a week. Still enjoy coaching the classes when I have an opportunity to do it, even though it's few and far in between. But it was something that I was really passionate about. And I was just like, damn, I'm going to spend all this time loving this thing, thinking about this thing, studying this thing. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, man, I would really enjoy doing this for a living. Like, I'm doing it so much. I'm spending so much time investing in this effort, this hobby. Why not try and monetize it? I was lucky in that CrossFit at the time, it still is a pretty popular, I guess you could call it a sport, right? Some people qualify it as a sport, and that there's local competitions and people do get sponsorship dollars for doing well. But I enjoyed it a great deal. And it had a thriving affiliate model. It had a pretty lucrative, or what seemed like a pretty lucrative structure from where I was sitting at the time. And I was like, you know what? This is something I can do. There's a bit of a framework for me to start this affiliate. And I opened up a CrossFit affiliate in 2016. Self-funded, wasn't able to get any lending, which is something we'll talk about in future episodes of Office Hours. But it was something I was passionate about. The framework was there. It was pretty low-hanging fruit, existed as an affiliate model. And literally, I was able to open up my gym 72 hours after I exited the military, and monetize it. And we were actually cash flow positive, and I was able to start paying myself within the first 6 months. And still am able to both pay myself and my employees to this day. So really proud of that. Now, the con to that, right, is that when you do find a passion and have an opportunity to monetize it, that passion, that hobby quickly turns into work. So buyer beware. You want to monetize your hobby. And I hear the saying all the time is like, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. You know what I'm saying? Well, I got news for you. That is bullshit. Listen, do what you love for work, and then every place turns into your office is what they should actually say. A lot of people walk into my gym. It's 15,000 square feet. It's got tons of equipment, tons of space, all kinds of great stuff happening. At any given point, there's usually anywhere between 100 people just kind of roaming around inside the place during peak hours. But most days when I walk into it, it kind of glosses over because it's 8 years, down the road. The honeymoon is over. You know what I mean? So when I walk in most days, it sort of seems like just an office to me. I'm like, damn, this is just where I work. And the first thing that I think of when I walk through the door is this piece of equipment isn't where it should be. There's a spot on the floor that needs to be mopped. This needs to be done. I need to repaint the office. And it's kind of like a laundry list of issues. So even though monetizing your passion, I do think is a fantastic way to enjoy going to work much more than the average citizen. Buyer beware when you're passionate about the thing that you do, and when you monetize your passions, when you monetize your hobbies, the things that you're passionate about and enjoy will very quickly start turning into work. So it's just something that you need to think about or consider, right? So whether it's barbecue rubs or creating a marketplace for military spouses, or God's sakes, maybe you've got the next great idea for a fintech platform, or whatever, be careful, because that thing that you're passionate about and that you really enjoy doing in the very near future might become something that's pretty arduous. But, that's the game that we play. That's the deal we make with ourselves, and hard chargers get charged hard. So number 3 at this point is be your own boss, which I think is fantastic. Listen, this is probably one of the biggest upsides to becoming an entrepreneur, is having the opportunity to just be your own boss, right? Listen, who here listening can relate with having somebody that's in charge of them? Or let me rephrase this. Have you ever worked for somebody that you knew unequivocally you were more intelligent than? I think like everybody would raise a hand up high in the air, right? There's nothing more frustrating than working for a dumbass. And there's nothing more frustrating than having the right answer to a problem, or having the solution to a problem, and then seeing your leadership not take advantage of that solution. But look, here's the deal. When somebody else is signing the front of your check and you're signing the back, that is the deal that you're going to make with yourself, is that you're essentially putting yourself in a position where you might not always agree with what your leadership, your chain of command, your commanders, whatever you want to call it. Commander is a military term. I'm sorry, it's hard to shake this stuff off even 8 years later. But it's difficult. It can be difficult to reconcile when you're working for somebody who you might not agree with, who you think is ignorant, who you might think runs the business poorly. But with all that being said, as an employee, you have lost all those voting rights. Because look, you have significant financial security, right? You have significant predictability in your income. And then when you get to walk away at the end of the day, you just get to walk away. And for most people, you do not have to take your work with you, right? So because you're not doing any of those things, you've lost that vote to a degree. Hopefully, you're working for an organization where you're a valued team member and your input and your opinion are valued, but that might not always be the case. And if that is not the case, and if that is not your desire, and you don't like taking orders, and you do think that you've got the next brightest idea, and you do think that your boss is a dumbass, you should go start your own business, because then you get to be your own boss. You get to call your own shots. You got a great idea. Congratulations. You're the one that gets to put it to work for everybody else, right? But here's the rub to that. When you are your own boss, all the mistakes are yours and yours alone to own. So being your own boss is great in that you get to take your opinions and your ideas and see them come to life, usually with the help of a fantastic team. If you've been smart enough to recruit smart, fantastic, hardworking individuals and compensate them appropriately. But the problem with that is sometimes even your ideas, even though, at the midnight hour, you might feel like you're touched by God and you have all the answers. In most cases, that might not actually be the case, right? So you really have to own all your own failures. And when you do fail as an entrepreneur, sometimes those failures seem and in reality are pretty catastrophic. Your decisions, your opinions, your leadership could very well lead that organization, into a rocky shore. You could crash that ship and then there could be no survivors. In some instances, most entrepreneurs aren't able to start a successful business until their second, third, or fourth try. That's especially the case for startups. So each time you iterate this new business idea, this new business plan, you could potentially be hiring and then laying off people, individuals, real people with real families, real mortgages, this kind of stuff. So the stakes become very high. And even though it's great to be your own boss, you got to be really comfortable with the high stakes that are associated with your decisions, not only impacting you, but potentially impacting your employees. And as companies get very large, those employees, that term gets pretty loose, and it could even become stakeholders. I mean, if you're a publicly traded organization, you could be affecting the lives of thousands and in some cases millions of people if you run that organization poorly and devalue it in such a way that it takes money out of people's pockets. So being your own boss is great, and that you have the opportunity to steer the ship in any direction that you want. But you just got to keep in mind, sometimes, even though you feel like you're touched by God and your ideas are the best ideas in the world, and that your story is the story of the world, in some cases, your decisions might lead you onto rocky shores and could cause a lot of damage, not just for you, but for those around you. So, buyer beware. It's a dual-edged sword, as is all these things, right? This is kind of my favorite thing about owning your own business or becoming an entrepreneur is there's potential for massive upside. Let me tell you where there's not potential for massive upside. Owning a gym or a restaurant, okay? I wish somebody could have traveled back in time and looked me dead in my face circa 2016 and be like, Ben, I know you're really passionate about opening up a CrossFit gym. Just unfortunately, it's like only 1% of all CrossFit gym owners are actually going to make over like $150,000 a year. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably like, $150,000 a year sounds great. Or you're probably like, I know some people who are like, I don't need to make $100,000 a year to be happy. Listen, that's just stupid shit that people that have never made $100,000 a year say. Trust in me, my brothers and sisters in Christ, you want to make over $100,000 a year. It's the shit. You get to do all your shopping at Whole Foods. You can get cold pressed juice. You could just like supersize that meal without having to think twice about it. Making six figures a year is the shit. All right. So first and foremost, make sure that you're picking an industry that's got an economy of scale. Don't be trying to open up a restaurant. Don't be trying to open up a gym. Poor economy of scale unless you're absolutely touched by God and you're just like the next rainmaker for that industry. But in most cases, like I've even talked to individuals who replace carpet in government buildings, and they are well on their way to becoming an actual millionaire because they have repeating government contracts in multiple facilities across the United States. Listen, I don't even know who's using carpet anymore. It just seems like a gross sponge that absorbs DNA. I don't know how the shit came about. Presumably in the 1950s, people thought the idea of having shag carpet or being able to lay on something soft was some kind of weird flex. Brother, get hardwood floors throughout your house or some of that engineered or laminate stuff and just call it a day. You can vacuum everything up. God, it's like, what happens when you spill something? It's just there forever. It's not coming out. There's literally a sponge underneath it. It just lives there for the rest of our lives. God, it's disgusting. But whatever the case may be, that individual is making an absolute killing, providing government facilities with carpet. And it has a fantastic economy of scale because presumably there's still government facilities and organizations that want carpet in their facilities, right? So you have this potential for massive upside by owning your own business, okay? Conversely, if you're in the private sector or just somebody's employee, you are going to know in perpetuity essentially what your potential for earnings are. Now, there are some exceptions to this. People that work in sales positions or finance, really just any sales position. Typically speaking, those individuals have bonus structures that are based on target earnings established between their leadership and themselves, by which they can get large bonuses. But even then, there's still an absolute cap. So to a certainty that you're either going to make this at a baseline, which is referred to as your base salary, with potential for this much in terms of bonuses. And you'll also conversely know that you are only going to be able to get incremental raises throughout the years. And now call me crazy, but the idea of knowing what I'm going to make from now until the end of time makes me extremely uncomfortable. I hate the idea of being like, all right, I'm just going to make $120,000 a year for the rest of my life. Hey, fuck that. I do not like that idea. I do like the idea of saying like, hey, listen, there might be times of famine where, I'm making low six figures or below, but those times of famine might be where I'm building an opportunity to create a feast. And the fact of the matter is if you have built out an entrepreneurial effort that has significant economy of scale, there is potential for massive, massive upside, right? Good examples are, some of these bedrock or flagship entrepreneurs, Jeff Bezos, who at one point was like working in a walk-in closet that had the words Amazon spray painted. It's that famous picture we all see of him back in the day. He looked worse then than he does now. Shout out to having $1 trillion. It makes you look great. Elon Musk is another one. Used to have a pretty deplorable hairline. Come to find out, having like, $1 trillion can fix that as well. But these individuals took ideas that were very disruptive for specific industries, whether it was shipping books and then all items across the board, consumer product goods, and making sure that there's a way to easily and quickly receive almost anything you want right at your front door through a couple of clicks, or making sure that, we have a vehicle that's clean, efficient, fast, futuristic, and is helpful for the environment, or to get internet anywhere in the world that's much, much faster than what I have here at my own Tampa home. You know what I mean? This kind of stuff, these kind of ideas have potential for massive, massive upside. And you just can't find that working in a 9 to 5. It's few and far in between. Now, the con to this, of course, is that wherever there's potential for massive upside, there's also potential for catastrophe. And as an entrepreneur, you might be able to make tons and tons of money, but there's also significant risk involved with starting your own entrepreneurial effort or starting your own business. And that's that it could go bankrupt at any time. The industry that you're working in could disappear overnight. A good example is like one of the largest industries in the world in like the early 1900s, like 1903, was whale oil. And then like once they developed petroleum products, that industry disappeared absolutely overnight. Some other good examples of industries that have probably taken a turn for the worse is probably like landline phones. I bet. I don't know who the producer of like an actual physical phone that like stays plugged into your wall that you just answer. It was like, hello, how may I help you? And it's like a guy selling vacuum cleaners. I mean, whatever company was making the majority of those phones, I mean, there's probably a gravestone down the street with their name on it. You know what I'm saying? It just probably doesn't exist anymore. So understand that like if your business goes under, if your industry for some reason encounters instability, great example is during COVID-19, many businesses were affected both in ways that were positive and negative. But just understand that even though there is potential for massive upside, there's potential for disaster as well. You could just as easily go bankrupt. And I would submit that the majority of entrepreneurs have an origin story that includes either their current business having almost gone bankrupt or one of their previous businesses going bankrupt. So entrepreneurs having stories about how they were like millionaires for several years and then lost everything is really, really common. And then once again, going back to being your own boss, in most cases, you don't have anybody to blame but yourself, right? And even if it's market conditions that are somewhat out of your control, it's still up to you to be able to try and take a long, hard look at what's going on in the market to better understand if your business is going to be viable long term. And if it's not, you got to start making a decision to pivot. So really interesting, that there's this potential for massive upside, but just understand With great reward, also typically speaking, comes great risk. And then the last thing here is, man, it's a great way to deal with your mental illness. And I'm joking around a little bit when I say this, but like, here's the thing: like, if you want to make a decision to become an entrepreneur, to start your own business, man, there's got to be something kind of wrong with your ass. You got to be just a little bit crazy. Once again, you have to be so risk aggressive. You have to be willing to kind of risk it all. You got to take a big chance. And the most difficult thing that I have found about starting my own business or participating in entrepreneurship is, my friends, family, those closest to me, people that I consider mentors, and in some cases, almost all of them at one point in time have been like, damn, man, I hope you know what you're doing, right? Said another way, you will not always have a ton of support from those people closest to you and those people around you. Now, conversely, I've had tons of people that have continued to cheer me on from the sidelines, support my businesses, whatever they may be. I've had friends that have maintained memberships at my gym for the better part of a decade, even though they probably don't need it. Shouts out, I appreciate you. And it's just one of those things. But listen, to start your own business, right? There's going to be people telling you that you shouldn't do it, people telling you that you're crazy, all this kind of stuff. And the fact of the matter is they're probably right. You're fucking nuts to be opening your own business, right? You're crazy. It's a huge risk, and there's much better ways to make a living. But the fact of the matter is, you got to be cut from some different stuff to start your own business. You got to have radical faith in yourself. You got to have a beautiful idea that you're absolutely determined to see come to life. And the fact of the matter is if you're going to participate or pursue entrepreneurial efforts, right, you've really got to be willing to walk a path that most people would never even consider. But here's the deal. If you do make that decision and you do have this idea that's disruptive and crazy and out of control, if you do have the opportunity to bring it to life, listen, it's a fantastic thing. And I had an opportunity to talk to a couple different participants in our programs through Warrior Rising. And on last week's call, a couple people brought up something that was really interesting that had never come up before. And they were essentially asking questions about how they manage their personal time, and how they essentially are creating space to ensure that they're maintaining good mental health. I mean, that was like the bottom, like that was essentially bottom line up front, is they're like, hey, listen, how do I make time for myself? And I didn't have a good answer at that time. And I don't think I do now either. But the fact of the matter is that champions don't have balance. Anybody that ever stood on a podium, won a gold medal, was anointed as best in the world, or being in first place in any very difficult effort, they had no balance, right? And I bet you along the way, people told them that they were insane. And in some cases, even after they stood on the podium and were told that they were the best in the world at something, people were still probably like, yeah, that person's nuts. So the fact of the matter is like, if you want to do this, if you want to be the best, if you want to be a champion, you will have to make vast sacrifices. And some of those sacrifices might be your mental and physical health, right? You will have to sacrifice personal time. Your family could suffer. Your personal life might be completely non-existent. But at the end of the day, if you have the opportunity, and you work hard and you believe in yourself, you have this chance to create something that's so beautiful, so special, and so uniquely yours. And if you have that idea and you've been sitting there for a long time, you've been thinking to yourself, man, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. I really want to be one of those people that's out here and encouraging you. And I want to tell you, you probably can do this. You probably can do this. And yes, the journey will be long and hard. Yes, there is great risk involved. But at the end of the day, I think you'll be happier for having done it than if you had not. I really appreciate you guys joining me for the first episode of Office Hours. I hope I didn't rant for too long. You'll be able to catch us every other Tuesday for me to just kind of riff on different entrepreneurial topics and subjects. Hopefully along the way, we'll have some program participants that'll give us some great questions that we can bring to the broader listener group. Don't forget, if you have any questions about Warrior Rising and our programs, you can always reach out to warriorrising.org or our website, warriorrising.org. And then, of course, you can always email us at programs@warriorrising.org. Don't forget, Warrior Rising is the premier veteran organization dedicated to helping veteran entrepreneurs find passion and purpose through entrepreneurship. I appreciate you tuning in. I can't wait to talk to you again in a few weeks. Ciao.